This is the Gary Nolan Show.
All right, PDMP, it is the Prescription Drug Monitoring Program. 49 states have it. We do not. The Senate here in the state of Missouri, there are several people in favor of it. And we're going to discuss this with Caleb Rowden and find out exactly where he stands and why he believes whatever it is that he does believe. This is the Zimmer Radio Network. 35 minutes after the hour. Glad to have you with us. Glad to be with you. Caleb Rowden joins us. Senator, welcome. How are you?
Morning. Good to be here.
Glad to have you with us. PDMP, does it look like this legislation is going to go through?
You know, it's always a tough lift. I think that there is some of the biggest opposition was Rob Schaaf, who is not in the Senate any longer. I think the conversation is fundamentally different now than it was, maybe say 3 or 4 years ago, because the St. Louis County implemented its program that is now covering 87% of the state as far as population. And so what we are now attempting, the conversation has shifted a little bit as far as what a state-run PDMP would bring or not bring, because the St. Louis County program that most of the state is operating under, including most of mid-Missouri, it has no Second Amendment protections, has no Fourth Amendment protections, which the program that we are attempting to pass in Jeff City does.
Why would we pass this at all? What is the point of doing this?
Because it already exists. 87% of the population is covered by a PDMP that is being run by a person who, as of about 20 minutes ago, was indicted on federal charges, St. Louis County Executive Steve Stinger.
All right, so 80% are covered, but why would we pass it so that everybody is covered? What is the point of it? What is the whole point of PDMP?
Well, because I think fundamentally there's a couple things. I mean, again, there was the conversation that was happening 4 or 5 years ago as to the merits of whether or not a PDMP was effective.
Effective at what?
At keeping the folks from abusing opioids. I think that's.
And we want to do that. Why? Do we want to protect them because they're going to harm themselves?
I think it's. I think there is a public health issue at play, but I think, which is part of the reason why I wanted to come on. I think a lot of those conversations, which maybe not everybody agrees with me, I think a lot of those conversations are secondary now to the fact that. You can have the conversation of, is it a fundamental role of government, how it should be done, et cetera. That is one conversation to be had, and we've had that conversation in Jeff City for a number of years, which is why it's never passed. The conversation and the reality that we live in today is that most of the population, a good chunk of the population in the state, is covered by a program that does not have any Second or Fourth Amendment protections, and the database that is created is never purged. Whereas some of the things that we would like to do, if we are going to implement a program statewide and take the control away from St. Louis County, which I don't think that they should have, is to have those Second and Fourth Amendment protections available to make sure that the database is purged every 2 or 3 years or whatever, so there isn't this infinite amount of data available for folks that are looking at it. I think that is, whether we like it or not, and I understand folks that were adamantly opposed to it, I understand why they don't like the fact that that's where the conversation is. But in terms of what we are doing in Jefferson City, that is the construct of the conversation, is whether or not we are going to let St. Louis County run the state's PDMP.
All right, so we're doing the whole thing. Even St. Louis County is doing it to protect people from their own bad behavior.
Correct. There is an opioid crisis that exists. That is a real thing that I think is pervasive in a lot of communities. But there is the conversation that you're having. I think all of that though is trumped for the moment by the fact that we have let a guy who now has been indicted on pay-to-play, and God knows if pay-to-play has reached into the PDMP system that they created in St. Louis County. We are letting that person and that entity run the program for 85% of the state, including Boone County. I think that's irresponsible. All
right, well, I think what we should be working on is getting rid of the PDMP that's in place in St. Louis County, rather than putting the rest of us under that same umbrella. And without, 49 states have this. We don't, and we were ranked at number 25.
Right.
Which is remarkable. You'd think we would be like the highest death rate of all. And now I understand it's bumped up to like 31 or 32. So it's getting even better without PDMP statewide. So instead of putting my prescription drugs in the marketplace, let's get everybody else out from under. And there's one more aspect of this. If somebody's addicted to opioids, I'd rather they go to a doctor to get their opioids, where they have at least a chance of a doctor counseling them, rather than have them afraid to go to a doctor and start buying heroin in the middle of the night in a park in downtown St. Louis.
I get it. I mean, look, it is. I understand the conversation. I understand the pushback. I think I have to operate, and we operate down there in. There aren't as many black and whites as we would like. I think when we get involved in these issues in Jefferson City, and I think our reality is St. Louis County's run the program. There probably is not a scenario based on the bipartisan support for PDMPs that you would ever undo that. And so I think our answer to the problem, which we think St. Louis County running the system is a problem, is to put a system in place that would provide those protections, would provide an opportunity for the database to be purged periodically. I think that is, from my perspective, it's the only path forward.
Why not just write a law that says if any county does a PDMP, here are the restrictions on that PDMP, and then have the governor sign it, and bingo, you've changed that law to meet the requirements that you think this law provides, and at the same time doesn't force everybody else in the state.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about. We've been trying to figure out. I think there's a good group of us, and I would consider myself to be one of these folks who is trying to find a way, kind of wiggle room out of the variables that we find ourselves in, and that's not a bad idea. I don't know what kind of support or opposition that would come up against, but I think it's. I understand, the folks in mid-Missouri probably a lot of them don't even know that we are living under the St. Louis,
I
program
know,
right
and
now.
I'm not happy about it either. There is, I understand, a lawsuit against the St. Louis County PDMP. They think it may violate HIPAA. Maybe we at least wait until it's
possible
carried through.
Yeah. I think I will say they reference the firearm piece. I think that's one of the things. One of the things that we've got to figure out is I think there is a world in which the federal government get a hold of the database that's being put together from the St. Louis County program. That's one piece that's in our state program. If whatever we do, I think one thing we'll be certain is that we're going to make sure that there's not going to be any overlap with gun owners. We're not going to let that happen. So and that's one thing that there is no protection for as of now. So
let me grab a phone call here. Ron, if you ask quick, maybe we can get the answer quick.
Okay. Back whenever we had concealed carry database and they gave it to the feds and they weren't supposed to.
Yep.
Did anybody go to jail for that?
Nobody went to jail that I know of. The Department of Revenue got their budget cut by almost a half by my predecessor, Senator Schaefer. And I think that's part of the reason why, if we're going to do something in the PDMP front, that one of two things should happen. We should either have control of it to make sure that the Second Amendment protections are in there, or we should do what Gary said and make sure that an existing program doesn't allow for those things to happen, because it's a concern that in the current, if we do nothing, then you should be worried about the Second Amendment stuff. There's no doubt about it.
All right. Thank you for the call. Caleb, thank you for stopping in.
Thanks, Gary.
We can keep you for a whole hour. It's running that fast. All right. You're listening to The Gary Nolan Show. It is the Zimmer Radio Network.
This is The Gary Nolan Show.